You see, what I find is like all this technology that you have out there right now, a lot of times people will just think, okay, I can just log into a website, download a list, and just click on a button and mail a postcard, and then just sit back and wholesale my first deal. And the thing is that while that's true, the fact is that that's going to cost you a lot of money if you're a beginner. And if you don't get immediate results, you might get disgruntled or worn out and move on. But if you can actually learn your markets and you're driving through a neighborhood and you see the same house and you stop, and you get out of your car and you speak to the next door neighbor, and it turns out that so-and-so just passed away and she's got the relative's phone number, that one phone call could turn into $50,000.
Lex, thank you for joining me for our Thought Leader Spotlight series. I'm your host, Matt Camp, head of partnerships for DealMachine. And on these, we really like to shine an industry spotlight on experts like yourself, really hear your inspiring stories and educate our audience on the lessons that you've learned over the years. So I'm really excited to welcome on today a good friend, Lex Levinrad. Lex, you've been in real estate investing since 2003. You've purchased, rehab, wholesale, fix and flip, buy and hold, everything, over 1,000 single family homes at this point, and still do about 15 to 20 per month. I know outside of that, you also are an internationally recognized speaker and do, it sounds like 10 events a year. And you've been teaching others how to do real estate like this since 2008 as well. So you're definitely, an exciting guest, excited to have you on. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and our audience will too. So thanks, Lex.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. To start off, I mean, I really love to dig a little bit deeper around your real estate investing journey. And especially, I know you had some pretty interesting timing, in 2008 when you were spinning up, everything you're doing from an event perspective too. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about how you got into real estate and your journey to today?
Yeah. So I was basically, I used to be in a stock business, and basically stock market crash of 2000 kind of took me out of that business. And I signed up for a late night infomercial by a guy named Carlton Sheets. He had a program called No Money Down. He said, with my system, you could buy real estate with no money down. It was pretty appealing because I didn't have any money at the time. And so I signed up for that. And then from there, went on a journey, reading a bunch of books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, etc., and started looking for real estate. And the challenge that I had at the time was I was living in Los Angeles and real estate prices were pretty high. Made the decision in 2003 to move to Florida and focus exclusively on real estate and to become a real estate investor. And primarily the reason for that was because in this course by that guy Carlton Sheets, he was talking about 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom houses that you could buy for like $45,000. And in LA, that was like $450,000. So, so we moved to Florida, and I got my start essentially working for a guy who essentially became my mentor and also a good friend. And he basically taught me the business. I essentially was a bird dog for him, like a deal locator, and looking for deals for him for the first couple of years before I went off on my own.
Yeah. And then I know really, your events today, I love that you talk about the why behind real estate and how to really talk about how to build a lifestyle, and build your strategy based on that lifestyle. Can you maybe talk more about that approach and how you think about, real estate investing from that perspective?
So, what I noticed with a lot of real estate trainings is that there's a big focus on one specific aspect, like let's say, for example, wholesaling, right? Or let's say fixing and flipping or Airbnb or whatever what it might be. But the thing is, what I like to have is what I teach my students is what we call a complete real estate investor. And that means you need to know how to make money in any real estate market, in an up market, a down market, a sideways market. And you also have to, every deal is going to be different. Not every deal is going to be the same. So some houses may come along and that could be that perfect rental opportunity for you. Another house may come along and it may be a great Airbnb opportunity for you. And another one may be a good fix and flip. But what I see too many beginners, there's too much focus and emphasis just on the wholesaling side. So I see people that may be able to wholesale 10 or 15 or 20 deals a month, but the thing is they're not keeping anything and they're not building wealth. And so we have a big focus of saying to people like, look, you're here at our event or you're in our training because you want financial freedom. That's what attracted you initially to real estate. So make sure that with all those houses that you're flipping, that you keep a few long-term so that you can really get the tax benefits and the appreciation benefits of holding real estate long-term.
Yeah, and I know you speak on, when you're teaching people, these variety of different strategies like this. You mentioned like, hey, you need to have a plan B at all times. You need to have, that backup plan in terms of different exit strategies. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit and what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So when I got into real estate, the market was really hard, kind of the way it is right now. So I got into 2003, and 3, 4, 5, they were just crazy years. I mean, I bought like $3.6 million worth of real estate in like 18 months, and I was as an absolute beginner, right? But we didn't know at the time, I didn't know what a down market looked like. So basically, when you go into a market that's going up and you're over leveraged and you're buying and buying and buying as much as you can, when the market changes, then you can get caught with your, proverbial pants down or not in a great situation. So basically, what I always like to have is a plan B option where I say to someone, like, look, if you're buying a property and you're paying, like, let's say no more than 100 times rent, and your goal is to keep it as a rental and you're getting a hard money loan, but you're going to refinance, my first question will always be, well, what if you can't refinance? Then what's your next plan? And so if you're in a property where your rent multiples work, then you're going to be okay. You're going to be able to ride it out, which is exactly what I did by having lower priced properties. When I started out, I couldn't really afford to go into, 3, 4, $500,000 houses. So I started out with cheap, low income neighborhoods where I could buy very inexpensive properties, fix them up and rent them out. And because of the type of neighborhood, I didn't have to do like really high end. It was all basic Home Depot materials for the finishes, but I was able to cash flow and survive that market of that downdraft of 2007 and 2008 and 2009. And then when the market bottomed in around 2009 here in Florida in around March of 2009, we were able to go back out to investors that we'd worked with and refied back in 04 and 05 and 06 and borrow a lot of money and come in and buy 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom houses for like $35,000. Like in 1 month, March of 2009, we bought 9 of them. And those houses today are worth $350,000. So, that's why I always say to people, don't forget that it sounds like a long time, but really, if you think about it, it's like 11, 12 years. And the houses increased tenfold, like 10 times their purchase price. So
Wow.
you can really make a lot of money and build a lot of wealth by just holding onto real estate and buying it at the right price. So buying at the right price is really, really important.
Yeah, so I was going to ask in terms of buying right, like how can you get really specific for our audience on how to define that, what metrics you should be looking at, like how to really buy right?
So in today's market, it's quite challenging because prices are so high and this whole COVID effect where there's like no supply and there's incredible demand. So it's a little bit of a distorted market right now. And I'm thinking that with the foreclosure moratorium ending, that probably there will be a little bit of an increase in supply. And I think maybe this whole interest rate increase as well can contribute to that too. But I think as far as buying right, the way I look at it is like this. Real estate is a great asset to hold long-term, no matter what, in any market condition. However, having said that, it's an asset, and it's an asset that creates cash flow. And that cash flow relative to the price of that asset is very, very important, because in the bottom of the market, when I was buying those houses for $35,000, they were renting for $1,000 a month. So I was buying their houses at less than 50, like about 30 times rent, which is just very, very cheap, almost unheard of, right? Now those same houses are selling for $350,000 and they rent for $2,000 a month. So now they're approaching 200 times rent, which would be $400,000. And historically, that's where they're expensive. So I think the key thing is in today's market, the only way you can add value or force equity, and I'm talking single family specifically, is to either buy something that's really damaged, where you can buy it for 40, 50 cents on the dollar, and then spend 15, 20 cents on the dollar fixing it up. And then you'll still be into it at 75, 80 cents on the dollar, and you'll be able to refinance out of it. So that's one way. And that would be focusing on like a lot of the stuff with DealMachine, vacant properties, boarded up houses, where you've got a disinterested seller and a very motivated to sell seller, like somebody who, we had one house we bought it from someone where the parent had passed away. They lived in Seattle. They had no desire to come to Florida. They didn't even know how to get into the property. We had to hire a locksmith to get in. Everything was in there, all the furniture and everything. And I just said, just tell me how much you can give me cash. and they weren't interested in comps or the value or anything. So that kind of deal can really, really work in any market, up or down, any market. Another thing that I think that investors should really be looking for now is opportunities for creative financing, because you've got situations where you may have an older seller and they don't necessarily want to sell at too much of a discount, but because they're retiring or they're downsizing, they're looking for what to do with their cash, and they may not feel so comfortable having it in stocks or bonds, and they may be okay getting 5% or 6% on it by financing you. So you buy their property for, let's say, 300, and you put 20 or 30,000 down, and they're willing to give you that loan for that other 270. So that's a strategy that could work. And then I think the third strategy that can work really well, which I think we're going to see a good opportunity this year in, is where somebody buys a house. We just saw one of these 2 weeks ago. They bought a house for 500, and now they got a relocation offer to move to a different city, and they're going to sell the house. But they're looking realistically, they put 10% down. They got a $450,000 loan. But if they go and list that same house back on the market at 500 after commissions and closing costs, it's 450, and they basically lost their 50 grand. So in a scenario like that, you may look at it as an investor and say, well, it's not much of a deal. I'm not really buying it at a discount. If I buy it at 450, I'm buying it 50,000 off retail. However, if you dig deeper into it and the mortgage payment is only $2,000 and it's a house with a pool that could be a great Airbnb, then we look at that and say, hey, listen, how about, you're not really going to get anything out of this house either. So you just want to sell it and move on, right? So how about we just buy a house for the value of the existing debt, and we just take over that mortgage. And now we've got a $2,000 payment with a house that we can easily get $8,000 a month on an Airbnb. So I think that you've got to be creative in this market. And I think that the low interest rate mortgages that were written in the last year or two are definitely something where that'll become an opportunity.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I think, and one thing that you do really, really well within your events and your podcast and social media and all that, I think you do a good job speaking to the core fundamentals of real estate like that. And when it comes to creative finance, I know that's an area we have people very interested in, but can be a little overwhelming because there's so many different options, different things to learn. So can you maybe talk about how you approach that subject within your events, within your boot camps, on how you teach the core fundamentals around creative finance like that?
Right. So basically, with the core fundamentals, there's some educators out there who have the philosophy that with wholesaling, you just make an offer, you get the seller to accept your offer, and then you just, put it out on an email list and you find somebody who wants to buy it. And, that'll work in today's market because there's no supply and there's so much demand, and everybody wants to be an investor. Everyone's getting a real estate license. The problem with that is that when if the market shifts, then the more what let's call them the old time or the OG real estate investors that were around before the crisis, right? People like me, they tend to take a step back and be like, no, I'm not going to buy that right now. And so those wholesalers find themselves in a situation kind of like where you've got a clothing store and nobody wants to buy inventory anymore, right? So how do you make money if you're spending money marketing and you've got no customers anymore? So at that point in time, that's where this complete real estate investor concept becomes so important, because you have to pay attention to the fundamentals. So the old school approach of saying, hey, what's the ARV on this house? What is this house worth fixed up? What will it cost to repair it? And what is the maximum that I would be willing to pay for this? What we call the maximum offer price is really, really important, because if you're paying attention to that, you can operate in any market. We opened up our business in October of 2008. We did our first event in 2009, and we just completely killed it, just wholesaling and flipping bank-owned properties and REOs. I wrote a book called Wholesaling Bank-Owned Properties, which you can get a free copy on my website. But basically, we flipped literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, and that was in a market that was just going straight down. So the minute the market changes, all these investors from out of the country get really, they view U.S. real estate as a safe haven, and they view the US dollar as a safe haven. So every person with money outside of the US suddenly just hones in on buying investment real estate. And so you can really make money in any market, but the key is that you've got to be paying attention to those fundamentals. So we focus on, like at our wholesaling bootcamp, a lot of people come to it thinking, hey, we're going to teach them, which list to buy, or, how to text sellers, or how to build your cash buyers list. We don't really focus much on that stuff. We have that more on some of our trainings and our webinars, We focus more on, hey, this is what the house is worth. This is what it costs to fix it. And this is how much is the maximum you should be willing to pay. And we try and teach our investors to not be afraid to close on a property. In other words, if you're buying it at the right price, why would you flip it to someone to make 10 or 20 grand when you can close on it and make 80 or 100 grand, right? So paying attention to the fundamentals is really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one thing. I mean, I was curious. So if, say, for example, a lot of people watching this are, newbies as well, like trying to do that first deal or first couple deals. If you were, I know when you started, you went full into it and you did, quite a bit of real estate right away. If you were starting over in today's market, how would you approach that? Like, what would your strategy be? How would you go about, your entire process from finding that first deal to financing it?
So I think that the first thing is like what the way we teach, a lot of people have moved to a virtual model and understand that works very well. But our core training is essentially based on the concept of understanding a market really well. So we define a target market of an area that you want to focus on that's within a 30 to 1 hour minute radius of where you live. That's a good, what we call bread and butter neighborhood, which has got like entry level homes, but not a war zone, right? A decent neighborhood, a working class neighborhood that you can buy houses and you can keep them as rentals, you can fix and flip them, you could turn them into Airbnbs maybe, right? So in those markets, then defining those markets and learning them well and understanding who the investors are, what they're buying, what they're paying for those houses, what they're putting into them, repairing them, and what they're selling for, so you can get an understanding of that spread. The old traditional looking for vacant properties is always going to work really well. And driving for dollars and using DealMachine, looking for those vacant boarded up houses and going the extra mile. Because you see, what I find is like all this technology that you have out there right now, a lot of times people will just think, okay, I can just log into a website, download a list, and just click on a button and mail a postcard, and then just sit back and wholesale my first deal. And the thing is that while that's true, the fact is that that's going to cost you a lot of money if you're a beginner. And if you don't get immediate results, you might get, disgruntled or worn out and move on. But if you can actually learn your markets and you're driving through a neighborhood and you see the same house and you stop, and you get out of your car and you speak to the next door neighbor, and turns out that so-and-so just passed away and she's got the relative's phone number, that one phone call could turn into $50,000, right? So just being aware of your market and understanding your pricing and driving your market can really, really help. Now, as you get better at that whole concept of buying a house at a discount and maybe wholesaling to someone, then you can do a virtual model and you can expand like we do on pay-per-click the entire state of Florida. So clearly we don't know every single target market that well in the entire state of Florida, but we feel comfortable enough to say like, hey, these are the counties that we're going to take stuff down in, that we're going to keep as rentals and fix and flips. And these are the areas where we just want to try and wholesale this house for, $10,000 or $20,000. But the core fundamentals of understanding the market is really, really important, because otherwise what will happen is, I've seen this many times, where someone will look at comps on a property and they'll say, oh, this is worth X. And I'll say, no, I think it's worth quite a bit more than that. And they'll disagree. And they may not have access to the MLS as an example. And I know the neighborhood really well. And I know all the houses that have been listed for sale in that subdivision, and I've looked at them. And I know for a fact that there's nothing in there. And I've got 4 or 5 buyer's agents calling me looking for something. So I know that even though the printed comps say X, I could probably sell it for 40 or 50,000 more than that amount. So I may be able to offer more. And then the same thing in a down market as well, where you've got to adjust based on what's on the ground, and not just looking at an algorithm of like a Zillow or something like that. You've got to dig deeper than that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think we see that that advantage as well. Like you said, whenever you're out driving for dollars, like on that, that approach, it's the boots on the ground approach, and you're going to meet people and learn things that you wouldn't have that advantage to just sitting behind a computer, sending, shooting off mailers. So yeah. Do you so love kind of the core fundamentals, that approach on all of this. One thing I know I mentioned the funding side of it as well. If you're a newbie and you're wanting to, if you found a great deal like that, you've gone through all that entire process, and then you realize you're trying to buy and hold that property like you mentioned. If you're newer and maybe don't have the cash to do that yourself, do you have any advice on like partnering up, finding partners, like how to approach that side of the business?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is really understanding what you're going to do with the deal before you get into the deal, right? So
Mhm.
for example, I'm speaking to a student right now, so they found a house, it's a pretty decent deal. I said, why did you close? I don't want to close, I want to wholesale. I said, all right, well, if you want to wholesale, let us find a buyer for you. And then she put her deposit up. I'm like, well, why are you putting your deposit up? If we don't find a buyer for you, you're going to lose your deposit, right? So basically understanding what you're going to do with the property before you make that decision is very, very important. Because if you knew you were going to wholesale, you'd want to put down like $10, and you would want to make sure that you can back out of that contract. So your approach for bill is largely dependent. So if you don't have the cash and you wanted to do a fix and flip or buy your first property, then I would definitely recommend that you partner with someone who does have cash. So what I've found is, like, when I look at my real estate meetings, I'll see, the doctors and the dentists of the world who want to buy rentals, but they don't have time because they, looking inside someone's mouth all day. And then you've got the other group of people who may be someone in their 20s who's looking to get into wholesaling as opposed to going into corporate America, and they're willing to spend 8 or 10 hours a day looking for deals. So these two individuals can be very, very well suited together. So one of the things that we've seen work with our existing student structure is where one says, listen, I'll do all the work and you put up all the money. So the guy who's like the doctor, the dentist says, okay, we'll buy this property, I'll put the down payment, you get the hard money loan from Lex, I'll put in all the repair money, you go and meet all the contractors, and you can review everything with me, but you're the one who's doing all the legwork, and then we're going to list it on the MLS and we sell it. And then after we sell it, you'll pay me back whatever I put into it, and then whatever's left will be split 50-50. So that's an agreement that works really well. And I think the other thing I like about that as well is because you're not really in business per se with that person, right? We even have a thing in our agreement that we call a Peter clause, a pain in the what clause. And it basically says, I can buy you out or you can buy me out for $20,000 or $10,000, whatever that number is. So basically, you're just doing like a joint venture on one deal, and you see how it works out. If it works out well, you do a second one, you do a third one. And I've seen people go from that into becoming business partners and raising capital and buying multifamily and all kinds of things. And I've also seen people that have just done it as an option because they couldn't get capital. And once they've done 3 or 4 deals, then suddenly, going to the lending homes and of the world was a lot easier, and they were able to borrow at much more agreeable rates. So if you don't have the capital and you want to do a fix and flip, partner with someone that has money.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, I love that JV approach, and I think that's a lot more approachable for a lot of the newbies as well. So yeah, and then for the more advanced investor as well, I know we've talked about in the past, you speak on like using an assistant, using other team members for lead acquisition. Can you maybe talk about how you would structure a team as you start to scale up your operation a little bit?
Yeah, so basically when you start out in the beginning, like I think back to myself in 2003, driving through neighborhoods with like a yellow pad on the passenger seat, right? And then as you transition to going from being that guy who's putting out the bandit signs or who's driving the neighborhoods yourself, at a certain period of time, you start increasing your marketing. So let's say now you're doing things like incorporating DealMachine, and you're mailing postcards and yellow letters, and maybe you're even doing pay-per-click or Facebook ads. So now your phone is ringing like crazy, right? And the first thing that you're going to need to do in any business pretty much is hire some person to answer that phone. And so traditionally in this business, we'd call that a lead manager or an inside sales rep, right? Some people call it an admin or an assistant, but basically the purpose would just be to answer the phone, get the basic information on the property, and then hand it off to the acquisitions person. So when you're just growing, your first employee is often going to be that lead manager person. That person's on answer the phone, and then it's going to be handed off to you. Hey, Jack Smith called. He's got a property at 123 Main Street, and he'd like to sell it. He's looking to get 300,000. And then you from there can decide whether you want to buy over the phone or whether you want to go on an appointment. For us, what we do is anything that's within about an hour and a half, we will go on the appointment, but anything that's further than about 90 minutes away, we'll just buy over the phone. And then at that certain point in time, after going on those appointments, you're going to realize like, hey, I could hire somebody to go on those appointments for me. So at that point, you're going to hire an acquisitions manager. Right now, another key component of it is what are you doing? So if your exit strategy is I'm buying everything, taking it down, I'm building a portfolio of rentals, I'm building a portfolio of Airbnbs, then you don't have to really worry about dispositions. But if you're actually wholesaling, where your goal is just to take a deal down, and then get it under contract and then move it to someone else, then you're going to need a dispositions person or dispositions manager to speak to those cash buyers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a full-time dispositions manager, and all he does is speak to cash buyers that call in every day, and he puts out 2 emails a day that go out to investors, and that's what the dispositions manager does. So a very wholesale intensive operation is probably going to want to have a transaction coordinator as well. So your typical wholesaling company is going to look like an acquisitions manager, lead manager, a dispositions manager, and a transactions coordinator. And then at that point in time, depending on how you scale up your marketing, we end up having 2 or 3 acquisitions managers, and then another lead manager, and so forth, right? So some of my buddies in CG have operations where they have, that's the Collective Genius Mastermind. They have operations where they may have 3 lead managers, 6 acquisitions managers, 2 transaction coordinators, and they're doing high volume wholesaling where they may not be closing on a lot, or they're closing on some of the stuff, but really they're turning over a lot of deals. They may be turning over 400 deals a year or something like that.
Yeah, and we've had Jason on, we've had Leon Barnes on, as well. So our audience is, familiar with Collective Genius. But that's I really appreciate you outlining kind of the foundation on all those different roles and how, what the team can look like as you grow. But this has been phenomenal, man. I really appreciate the time today, Lex. What's the best way for our audience to get more involved with you? Would it be through your website?
You can check out my website at lexlevinrad.com, and also on my social media is also at Lex Levinrad. So, we've got a podcast we put out called Investing in Real Estate with Lex Levinrad, and we've got the YouTube channel, which is just youtube.com/Lex Levinrad. So a lot of social media, a lot of interaction. We do 10 live events a year, so a lot of people come to our events from our social media.
Yeah, so I'll make sure we link to that in the description on all of those. We'll also have a link on our Scaling Your Real Estate Investing Business description, or our free ebook in the description as well. But again, thank you so much for the time today, Lex. Really enjoyed this one.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, to everyone watching, this is Matt Camp with DealMachine, and happy deal finding.